Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns. Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton with episode number 145. And on this episode, we're going to rehash an old topic, net carbs or total carbs. Where am I these days on counting the carbohydrates? All right, so let's talk about it. So if you've been keto for a while, you already know this, but let's review for the newbies. There are three macronutrients. There's protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the thing you most severely limit when you're on a ketogenic diet or a low-carb diet, right? Those ways of eating are mostly defined by the carbohydrate intake. There are other factors about healthy eating that need to be observed, of course, but what makes a low-carb diet is the low carbs. It's actually the name of the diet. And a ketogenic diet is a very low carbohydrate diet. So we're going to talk about the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can be further broken down into four things. We got starch, fiber. Fiber then can be broken down into soluble and insoluble fiber. And then we've got sugars, and then sugar alcohols are kind of the wild card one in there. When you have an occurring in nature carbohydrate, it's just the first three. You got starch, fiber, and sugars. And again, there are two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Now, when we count our carbohydrates, you can talk about total carbohydrates. So that's all of the fiber, sugar alcohols, and starches in that food. And so that's the total carbohydrates. Or some people talk about net carbohydrates. And to get net carbohydrates, you subtract some of those things. So most people would say that net carbs are just the starches and the sugars. So you're subtracting the fibers and the sugar alcohols from any that are in the total carbs. So let's take broccoli, for example. In 100 grams of broccoli, which is 3.5 ounces for the Americans, we've got 6.6 total carbs. Of those total carbs, 2.6 are fiber, 1.7 are sugars. There are 0 sugar alcohols, which means that the remainder of the carbs are coming from starch, right? Because on nutrition labels, they list fiber and sugar, so you can always figure out what the starch is. So when we're trying to figure out net carbs on this, we would look at the 6.6 and say, okay, I'm going to subtract the fiber. So 6.6 minus 2.6 is 4. And there are no sugar alcohols to subtract. And so there are 4 net carbs in 6.6 grams of total carbs of the broccoli. Okay. So that's how you get net carbs. And if you had something like something that had a sweetener in it, you would subtract that. But basically, net carbs are, I am being very repetitive here, but I want to make sure you get it. Net carbs would be total carbs, less fiber, less sugar alcohols. Now, some people then get creative with their choices. And some people say, well, I'm net carbs on sugar alcohols, but not on fiber. Or I'm net carbs on fiber, but not on sugar alcohols, or I'm net carbs on vegetables, but not on packaged goods, right? So some people pick and choose their net carb moments. What do I think about net carbs? I just think net carbs are a bad idea. Why do I think net carbs are a bad idea? 2 reasons. The first reason is that if you're using any prepackaged, highly processed foods, you are being taken advantage of in terms of net carbs. The food manufacturers have learned to play super annoying games with the net carbs and call certain things fiber that I would not call fiber, that I would call sugar, that I would say they act in your body like sugar. And so you're just playing a fool's game using net carbs on those foods. The second thing I would say is that when we subtract 100% of the carbs from fiber, we are not acknowledging that fiber is not completely innocuous. I know I'm not talking about those of you that have issues with gut issues with fiber. That's a totally other issue. But from a calorie and macros perspective, so what happens to fiber when we eat it? So we eat fiber. Now there's soluble and there's insoluble, which should make sense when we think about the word soluble and insoluble. Soluble is soluble. It can be digested more than the unsoluble or insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is kind of what most people think of as bulk, right? It's what you poop out because you can't digest it. So some people would say, well, the insoluble fiber then doesn't have any calories, right? Or doesn't have any macro impact because it's just waste. Well, but the soluble does. That is absorbed. But we're taking away all the fiber. But some foods are pretty high in soluble fiber and lower in insoluble, and some are the other way around. Well, do I have enough information to know that this should not count? No. And then the other thing is insoluble fiber actually does feed bacteria in your gut that then turns into short chain fatty acids, which then is used for energy, which is kind of like calories. So in fact, fiber can range anywhere from a half a calorie to 3 calories, depending on the type of fiber. So that doesn't sound like something that I should completely remove, right? Because total carbs is only 4 calories. So that's like 75% of them for some types of fiber. So at the end of the day, this sounds very complicated and should probably not be played with. So I would say, count total carbs. Always count total carbs. But I will say this. There are varying degrees of impact from those carbs. Obviously, higher fiber carbs are going to have less impact on your blood sugar. Higher fiber carbs have less sugars and starches to affect you. Higher fiber carbs, that gets hard to say. Higher fiber carbs have a different impact on your body. So if you tend to eat higher fiber carbs, then maybe you could have a larger carb tolerance, right? Now, this is where the idea of 20 carbs came up. So I want to say keto is often defined as eating under 20 total grams of carbs by a lot of people. They define it that way. And why do they define it that way? Because, well, I can say that it used to be defined as under 50 grams of total carbs, by the way, but that was when more athletic men were doing keto and fewer unathletic women were doing keto. I'm not saying that all women are unathletic and all men are athletic, but I'm just contrasting some things. And so the number got lowered to where almost everyone would be in ketosis. So at 20 grams or less, almost every human is going to be in ketosis. But does that mean you as a human need to be under 20 grams of carbs? Maybe not. And especially if those total carbs are coming from things that don't impact your blood sugar at all. Because when you impact your blood sugar, you impact your insulin. When you impact your insulin, you lower your ketones. So if you're eating the types of carbohydrates that don't raise your blood sugar very much or at all, then you might actually have a higher tolerance for those types of carbs within your day. So I'm not trying to be confusing, but this is the thing. If you want to apply blanket rules, they might have to be stricter than you want them to be. When you can customize the rules to work for your body yourselves, then you can skirt closer to the line and still see success. So what I'm saying is your carb tolerance, total carb tolerance, might be higher than you think it is if you're sticking to low glycemic, higher fiber, lower sugar, lower starch sources for those carbohydrates. So what do? I have a higher carb limit and I allow sugar alcohols to be in that, and I allow low sugar fruits and vegetables to be in that, and I test where my tolerance point ends. So I don't play games with net carbs. I mean, if the only carbs on the planet were fruits and vegetables, could you get away with doing net carbs? Potentially, yes. But I still think it's weird math. So what I would rather you do is eat a diet that is consistent right? So if you're like, hey, I love salads, I want to eat more vegetables, I'm going to try out eating more vegetables in my life and see what my results are. Do I feel good? Am I achieving my goals? Are the right things happening? If I need to be in ketosis, not everyone needs to be in ketosis, but if there's a reason I need to be in ketosis, such as I have neurological issues, memory issues, I'm dealing with some health problems like epilepsy or something where my ketones have to be in a certain range. If that's true, well, then you're testing your personal limit on carbs. And that would be with like a Keto Mojo type of meter so that you'd know where that line is for you. And that line can change over time. When I first started keto, that line was like 29 total carbs. Now that line, I can be in ketosis at like 45 grams of total carbs if I choose certain types of carbs. That can change over time. So if it's important to you that you be in ketosis, then you probably want to test if you're trying to be at the top of the limit. If you don't want to test and you're pretty sure your tolerance is pretty low, stay with the 20. That's totally fine. But don't play games with net carbs. That's ultimate. That's the whole podcast. Don't play the games with the net carbs. We're going to go there for the reasons I mentioned. Total recap. 1, you can't trust the net carbs because they mean different things from different sources. 2, you can't trust companies to tell you about the net carbs. I'll include this story. I covered this story in a podcast with Ted, and I'll put a link to that in the notes from an earlier podcast. But my question had been, there was a product out there from a chocolate maker that said it was super low net carbs, but every time I ate it, my blood sugar went through the roof. And I was like, Ted, how does this make sense? Now, why was I asking Ted? Ted is a food manufacturer. He does not manufacture the chocolate that sends my blood sugar through the roof. He actually manufactures products that don't raise my blood sugar. He taught me that soluble corn fiber and soluble tapioca fiber are very similar products that are in a lot of keto processed foods. And they can come in a variety of grades, and the different grades act differently in terms of the way the fiber impacts your blood glucose. And some, though they are all called fiber and will all say the same thing on the label, some will raise your blood sugar through the roof, as I experienced, and some are very benign in terms of blood sugar. But you'll never know just by reading the package. So because those kind of games are being played, I'm saying don't play. Don't play those games with them. You don't have to play. You can opt out. And the way to opt out is you count total carbs. And you learn, oh, erythritol doesn't raise my blood sugar, doesn't seem to kick me out of ketosis. I'm not going to worry about the erythritol here, or I'm going to include that in my value and go for a higher number. So at the end of the day, just be very honest, be very straightforward. Look at total carbs. Does that mean you have to stay under 20 total carbs? Possibly not. You can test that out. And so, yeah, I'm still team total carbs, but I would say I'm team total carbs with personal flexibility and personal responsibility, not team net carbs, where you're essentially saying, I don't want to know how this food affects me. I just want to know if I'm following the rules or breaking the rules. And if I'm following the rules, then I'm a good person and I can do this even though it's impacting my body negatively. La, 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 fingers in ears, right? Now, I probably have insulted some people that way, but let's just be perfectly honest. We've all done that. I certainly have spent a lot of my life with my fingers in my ears saying la, 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 la. So you're in good or bad company, depending on what your opinion on me is. But I'm now really droning on, and I feel like we've covered this topic. So let's wrap this episode up, and I will talk to you next week. Enjoy your week and enjoy your total carb count.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.